Welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. This is the second and final hazard mitigation plan public workshop. We have been working on this, developing the hazard mitigation plan update over the last year, couple of months. So thank you for coming out. My name is Craig Pereira. I'm a senior planner with the Horsey Witten Group and the project manager for this project. We do have our Auburn Local Hazard Mitigation Committee, typically elected officials as well as department chairs. And these folks have been the folks that I've been meeting with over the course of the last year plus in local hazard mitigation committee meetings to pull this update together and to get the information necessary for the submission. So why hazard mitigation planning? The Disaster Mitigation Act requires that all communities must have an approved multiple hazards mitigation plan in place in order to qualify for a future federal disaster mitigation grant, so FEMA funding. FEMA defines hazard mitigation as a reduction or elimination of long-term risk to life, property, and the environment. And they define natural hazards as any event or physical condition that has the potential to cause fatalities, injuries, property damage, infrastructure damage, agricultural loss, damage to the environment, interruption of business, or other types of harm and/or loss. So as part of this update, we developed a mission statement for the hazard mitigation plan update. The purpose of the hazard mitigation plan is to preserve the quality of life, property values, natural, historic, and cultural resources of the community by mitigating existing and future natural hazards impacting the town to foster a sustainable, resilient future for Auburn. As part of this update, we also developed 5 goals, and these goals are intended to be broad brush and overarching and not specific. So the first one is to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare. Number 2 is to reduce property damages caused by natural hazard impacts. Number 3 is to minimize social distress and economic losses and business disruptions. Number 4 is to provide an ongoing forum for the education and awareness of natural hazard mitigation issues, programs, policies, projects, and resources. And number 5 is to adapt to and mitigate for the existing and projected impacts of climate change towards a sustainable, resilient community. So the mitigation process has 4 primary elements: assess risks, establish goals, identify projects and actions, and update and maintain the plan. The first thing that we did was assessing risks, and we went and developed the hazard risk profiles for all the different types of hazards that this plan update will cover. We then established those goals that I just read off, and then as the project evolved over time, we were able to identify a number of projects and actions which you'll hear about tonight. And then we just had to provide some information that's required as far as how the town of Auburn plans to update and maintain the plan once it is adopted by FEMA. Outreach and coordination over the duration of the project. We have a project webpage that's been hosted on the town's website. We've had 5 committee meetings. We had a kickoff meeting a year ago, March, and then we had 4 local hazard mitigation committee meetings throughout the duration. We had a public workshop about a year ago. That was public workshop number 1, where we spoke to the existing hazard mitigation actions from the plan that we're updating now. And then we also just spoke about the hazard index and what our next steps would be. And we had a community survey that was also open for 8 months with 46 responses. So this is the first part that I mentioned. This is assessing risks, the hazard index. So here is our hazard index. It has all the different types of hazards categorized by type, and then each individual hazard. We are required to evaluate and assess all the same hazards that the state hazard mitigation plan has in their plan. If for some reason it's not necessarily applicable to Auburn because of frequency of events, then we can just certainly call that out in the plan, and we've done that. So these are all the hazards that we did evaluate. The first column is frequency. So we have a FEMA criteria categorization that we used to identify what the frequency for these events are. Part of that is based on the committee's local knowledge and their experience in the community. But there's also a database that's hosted by NOAA, National Climatic Data Center, that has a record of all the different types of hazard events that have happened over time, as well as what the impacts of those risks are, whether they are transportation disruptions, they could be injuries, they could be fatalities. They don't always have information on every single hazard, so that's why we have this hazard mitigation committee pulled together as well, so that they can sort of supplement that information that we can't find. One of the hazards that's very new to all hazard mitigation plans in Massachusetts is changes in groundwater-related hazards. That was identified in the most recent state plan last year, which is why we had to bring it into the discussion here. So from this table, you can see that changes in groundwater is the number one, 9 out of 10 hazard impacting the community, followed by inland urban flooding and heavy rain, which is a 7. Blizzard, snow, nor'easters, also a 7. Ice storms, a 7. High winds, which is also a 7. And extreme heat, which is also a 7. Part of our process also was to do an economic vulnerability analysis. So essentially we took and this is done via a GIS or a digital mapping platform. So we took the parcel data layer, the critical facilities and vulnerable populations data layers, and we overlaid the FEMA flood zone hazard scenario over that to identify all the parcels, all the critical facilities, and all the vulnerable populations that are that intersect with the flood hazard zones. I do want to caution that that is a bird's eye perspective analysis and not based on topographic features. So it may be that the parcel itself intersects with the 100 or 500 year floodplain, but the actual building may not. So if any part of the parcel or building intersects, then it gets incorporated into that. Another piece of the economic vulnerability analysis was the committee reaching out to the state floodplain coordinator to identify the current list of national flood insurance policyholders. So right now there are 30 policies in place for the town. There's just over $9 million in coverage for FEMA 100 year and 500 year. The town does have one repetitive loss property as well. So the impacts from the FEMA flood hazard zones that we did look at include the 100 year. There are 659 parcels that during that overlay analysis intersect with the 100 year flood zone at just over $386 million. And 500 year floodplain had 145 parcels that intersect at just over $80 million. Another piece of the vulnerability assessment is the social vulnerability. So we looked at public infrastructure and emergency lifelines. So when we did take a look at critical facilities and vulnerable populations, there were several municipal infrastructure, pump stations, treatment plants, groundwater wells that were located within the 100 and 500 year flood zones. Transportation system, we did a desktop analysis that just looked at the intermittent roadways that also intersect or cross over with that 100 year and 500 year flood zone. And then we also looked at vulnerable populations. So various environmental justice block groups and municipal buildings are located in the 100 and 500 year flood zone. And the new regulations that came out last year for FEMA guidelines require that vulnerable populations are now factored into the hazard mitigation plan updates, and that there's a special emphasis on that. So we make sure that that becomes a new data set in and of itself, and we utilize that to cross-reference that vulnerability analysis and to see where those intersections are. Mitigation strategy. So this is really the bulk of the hazard mitigation plan update. These are the actions that are included in the hazard mitigation plan. If they're in the hazard mitigation plan, and once that plan is approved by FEMA and adopted by the town, the plan will be active for 5 years, which is the typical planning horizon for an HMP. And then the town, as long as the action is included in your plan, then the town will be eligible to apply for funding to mitigate that issue. If it's not included in your strategy, your mitigation strategy, the town cannot seek funding to implement that. So when we did identify those mitigation actions, we started out by looking at the 2017 plan. Any of the actions that the committee identified as not completed and still valid, those got carried forward into the plan, and that was the first step of this mitigation strategy. We also did a capability assessment, which looks at all the plans, studies, and reports that the town has accomplished since the last plan was completed and adopted. And anything that's applicable to hazard mitigation, we brought over and carried that into this plan. We had the online survey. We also looked at our company's experience working with other communities as far as any changes in any state legislation or any kind of trends that are happening. And then also with local hazard mitigation committee coordination. So as we were meeting and people were bringing up issues, we were documenting that and included that into our strategy. So part of the process also is to categorize mitigation actions. We want to make sure that the hazard mitigation plan is a living document and is easily used and easily referenced by folks. So we made sure that we put mitigation actions into these 6 different categories. So planning and prevention, property protection, natural resource protection, structural projects, emergency services, and public education and awareness. The end process to our strategy was we are required to conduct an abbreviated cost-benefit analysis. So we use FEMA's STAPLE method, and STAPLE stands for social, technical, administrative, political, economic, and environmental. So for each of the actions that I'm about to go through, we as a committee sat down in our last meeting and we had to weigh the costs and the benefits for each of the mitigation actions so that we can show FEMA and MEMA that the town has gone through a process to review and included mitigation actions that are not only relevant to just strictly Auburn, but are also achievable in some point, whether it's just staff time, a low-hanging fruit, or significant funds that are required from FEMA. We had to assign timeframes for that. So again, a hazard mitigation plan has a 5-year planning horizon. After 5 years, it'll need to be updated again. So we have short term, 0 to 6 months, medium term, 6 to 18, and then long term, 18 to 5 years. We also had to assign estimated cost ranges. So staff time, minimal would be under $5,000. That would be your low-hanging fruit. Moderate would be $5,000 to $25,000, and then significant cost would be anything over $25,000. So this is our mitigation strategy, and we have them separated out, as I mentioned, by categories. So each action has a specific number, and then the red font actually identifies where that mitigation action comes from, partly for the local hazard mitigation committee when we were reviewing things, but also for the general public so that they can see that we have looked at all the plans, studies, and reports over time that the town's completed over time and brought those over into the hazard mitigation plan. The ultimate goal for the town should be, once this hazard mitigation plan is approved by FEMA and adopted by the town, as any of these other plans get updated or new plans become created, that they're carrying these mitigation actions over into that plan as well. The more that the town can show that folks in the town have vetted these mitigation actions across multiple demographics and multiple platforms, the stronger your argument is and the more teeth your application will have with FEMA. So the first category is public education and awareness. Action 1 comes from the Open Space and Recreation Plan to increase public awareness of the merits of open space preservation, conservation, particularly the benefits accrued for future generations. Action number 2 comes from best management practices to protect drinking water supply areas, to conduct public outreach. So utilizing best practices for winter storm maintenance activities, particularly with commercial and industrial sites, and then best practices related to outdoor storage of materials on commercial and industrial properties, particularly hazardous waste products. Action number 3 also comes from the best management practices to protect drinking water supply areas, installing signage. So evaluating potential modifications to roadway signage, which may better prevent the frequency of vehicular accidents, and then install markers at high priority stormwater outfall locations to allow individuals to more easily locate the locations in the field. So this action really speaks more to groundwater protection wells and their proximity to major thoroughfares or roadway network within the community. The next category is property protection. So action 4 comes from this process, our hazard mitigation plan update. So this is part of that vulnerability analysis overlay that I mentioned earlier. Ensure that critical facilities are adequately protected against flood-related hazards. So there are various municipal water, wastewater infrastructure located within both the 100 and 500-year flood zone, as well as the fire department headquarters being located within the 100-year flood zone. Action 5 also comes from our HMP risk assessment. So our process, coordinate with Aquarian Water Company to ensure that critical facilities are adequately protected against flood-related hazards. So again, it's groundwater protection wells that are located within the 100-year flood zone. Continuing with property protection, action number 6 comes from our process, the hazard mitigation plan update. Coordinate with the Century Sportsman's Club to ensure that critical facilities are adequately protected against flood-related hazards. So again, groundwater protection wells that are at risk or vulnerable. Moving on to natural resource protection, action 7 comes from the open space and recreation plan. In an effort to protect the town's water resources for the purposes of drinking water supply and recreation, considering both water quality and public awareness regarding the importance of Auburn's water resources. So permanently protect additional land area within the town's watersheds and protect potable drinking water for and from current future growth. Moving on to natural resource protection, action number 8, open space and recreation plans, improve the maintenance and management of recreation facilities. So incorporate native and drought tolerant plants and recreation facility landscaping, modifying subdivision regulations to require native and drought tolerant plant species, and continue to improve driveways, walkways, and parking lots, including drainage issues at the town's park and playgrounds. Action 9 comes from the 2019 master plan for the town to update the aquifer zoning bylaw, which includes flood-proofing pumps and water purification and protecting against power loss. Number 10 comes from the Auburn Master Plan again. Protect forests, wetlands, fields, and ponds from the harmful impacts of invasive species. So provide education to municipal staff about the identification, management, and removal of invasive plant species, which is also one of our hazards that we profiled. Prohibit the planting of any species listed on the most recent version of the Massachusetts Invasive Plants Advisory Group, and then create a recommended list of plant and tree species for developers and business owners to plant during construction and upkeep of their properties with the intent to limit non-native species and reduce the risk of invasive species. Action 11 comes from our 2024 update process. Design and construction for generator replacements at the Holstrom Court, Sword Street, Shore Drive, Pinrock, and West Street pump stations. They're all in need of replacement. Structural projects, action 12 comes from the 2018 plan report card that was not completed, but also was identified in the 2019 master plan for the town to investigate the feasibility of building a municipal fuel pumping station, do design, and then build a facility on town property. Action 13 comes from the Auburn MVP, or Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Project Summary of Findings in 2019, and best management practices to protect drinking water supply areas. I want to mention something about MVP that I should have stated before we started going through this list. The town of Auburn participated in the MVP program through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs in 2019. 2019 was the pilot year project, 2018 was a pilot year project. Since then, the town has become a MVP certified community, which then allows the town to apply for action grants through the MVP program. And that is specific to the state of Massachusetts, not FEMA, not federal. The MVP program action grants provide an opportunity as the first funding mechanism for these actions. And then bringing these actions from that plan into this plan as well now creates a second funding stream that the town can consider. There's definitely more flexibility with MVP funding and a little bit more forgiveness as far as the types of projects that you're working on or you're looking to pursue, but still important. So that's why I mentioned earlier about bringing other actions from other plans into this plan and then vice versa. So the actual action is to replace the Sword Street culverts. Priority to secure funding is short-term, and eventual replacement of the current structure is long-term. So incorporate DPW's recommendations for design elements to be incorporated into the bridge design. Continuing with structural projects, again, action 14 comes from the MVP summary of findings in 2019. So protect and improve water quality and quantity, and the specific actions under that: review water quality bylaws and revise, create an overlay of water bodies and catchment areas, and address salt use in the illicit discharge detection and elimination plan. Update zoning bylaws to encourage low-impact development and green infrastructure based on maps and delineation. Hire an engineer to focus on stormwater regulations, enforcement, NIPD's permits, and coordination with Mass DOT to improve drainage on state roads and highways. Work with private businesses and other owners of floodway property to clear vegetation to restore and maintain flood flow capacity, and to purchase equipment to make and distribute brine as an alternative for ice control on roads to protect water supply. Action number 15 comes from the best management practices to protect drinking water supply areas, install stormwater retrofits at critical areas. So again, this speaks specifically to contamination and by hazardous materials. So anything that is the groundwater protection wells that are located adjacent to or in the proximity of a thoroughfare or a major roadway. So the top 5 high-risk roads along I-90 and top 5 high-risk town roads. The high-risk state road locations are also part of a separate Mass Turnpike infrastructure project and could be included as part of the Mass DOT pavement restoration and preservation project to be completed in the next year or so. Action 16 comes from our 2024 HMP update process. The design and construction for emergency bypass connections to the Holstrom Court, Sword Street, Shore Drive, Pinrock, and West Street pump stations. Under emergency services category, action number 17 comes from the Auburn MVP summary of findings. Improve communications, increase support and participation by improving communications about emergencies, power outages, extreme events. Focus on reaching seniors and other vulnerable residents throughout the community. Increase participation in the Code Red program and Are You OK program. Establishing a neighbor-to-neighbor program. Distribute a flyer to all households explaining all the different ways emergency communications are done. Take full advantage of all electronic billboards in town for emergency messaging. And review crisis and public communications policies and procedures to ensure that plans prepared by businesses are shared and communicated with the town, as well as to improve the town's communications overall. Action number 18, also from the MVP project. Review evacuation planning. So plan with all stakeholders for senior and disabled residents evacuation, including transportation needs. Coordinate with assisted living, nursing homes, group homes, and their existing plans. Plan for evacuating people with medical issues who cannot go to a regular emergency shelter, and consider yearly contracts with bus companies or the Worcester Regional Transit Authority. Action number 19 comes from the best management practices to protect drinking water supplies. Adopt formal standard operating procedures, or SOPs. So develop an SOP for winter storm maintenance activities, including snow storage and disposal on town-owned properties. Consider a range of best management practices for road salt and winter operations, including bidding and procurement, material storage and material applications. Develop an SOP for calibration and maintenance of town-owned vehicles and equipment, and develop an SOP for spill response procedures. The next category is planning and prevention. Action number 20, it's a typo, I apologize, from the 2018 plan report card. The town is interested in developing a debris management plan. Action 21 comes from MVP. Assess the vulnerability of power transmission infrastructure. So evaluate trees for proximity to lines and tree health. Look into moving some lines underground and include cost analysis. Look at police, fire, schools, shelters, senior center to make sure existing generators have the capacity to meet the needs for cooling, refrigeration, and other demands during an extended power outage, and that they're maintained, tested, and operating properly. So typically, undergrounding utilities is considered cost prohibitive because it's a really high cost to implement that. But again, if the action is not in your plan and there's a funding mechanism for it, that you won't be able to pursue it. So that's why it's included here. Action 22, develop changes to subdivision bylaw, specifically requiring underground utilities and seek to expand underground utilities to all parts of town. So again, it's typically considered cost prohibitive, but we want to make sure that we have it in there just in case. Number 23 comes from the master plan, promote sustainable land use practices, so protect the natural landscape and resources throughout town and address the impacts of stormwater. So developing low impact development or LID design development guidelines and encouraging this method of reducing stormwater runoff in all new developments. Action 24 comes from the master plan in 2019. Improve the sustainability of town operations during emergency situations and prepare for the effects of climate-related events. So update and maintain the town's comprehensive emergency management plan. Pursue grants through the Massachusetts MVP program to combat the effects of climate change. Action 25 comes from this risk assessment that we just completed. So ensure the completion of recommended improvements identified in the most recent Phase 1 inspection report for the following town-owned dams: Auburn Pond Dam, Pondville Pond Dam, and Eddy Pond Dam. So one of the new elements of the updated federal regulations for FEMA for hazard mitigation planning has a high hazard dam component to it. So this is definitely the first hazard mitigation plan update that looks at dams located within the community at a higher level and a little bit more comprehensive nature. Because there is a funding mechanism associated with it, typically dam work is very costly and sometimes cost prohibitive for a municipality to manage those costs. So the most recent Phase 1 inspection report for these 3 town-owned dams has a certain set of recommendations. There's short, there's long-term recommendations. This mitigation action addresses taking that Phase 1 inspection report and actually implementing the recommended improvements for it. So action 26, again, it's a similar situation. It's just that these structures are owned by the Auburn Water District. So coordinate with Auburn Water District to ensure the completion of recommended improvements identified in the most recent Phase 1 inspection reports for Dockbrook Reservoir Dam, Dike A and Dike B, Lower Stoneville Pond Dam, and Upper Stoneville Reservoir Dam. Action 27 comes from this 2024 update process. Coordinate with the City of Worcester to complete a current Phase 1 inspection report, then ensure the completion of recommended improvements identified in the update Phase 1 inspection report for Mill Pond Dam. So the Office of Dam Safety for the state of Massachusetts has regulations as far as when the frequency for a Phase 1 inspection report needs to be done. For a high hazard structure, it needs to be done every 2 years. For a significant structure, every 5 years. And for a low hazard structure, it's every 10 years. So the current Phase 1 inspection report is out of compliance right now. So even though the town of Auburn doesn't necessarily have any teeth to make the city update that Phase 1 inspection report, we're putting a mitigation action into the plan to make sure that there is coordination over the next 5 years, so that hopefully the City of Worcester will in turn make that improvement as far as getting the Phase 1 inspection report updated and then getting some of the work completed. I do want to note that the emergency management director from Worcester did reach out as part of the public comment period, asking if the City of Worcester has been responsive to the town of Auburn. I directed him to you, Adam. Because that's not information that I have. Action 28, also coordinate with the City of Worcester to annually update the emergency action plan for Mill Pond Dam. So again, Office of Dam Safety for the state of Massachusetts has a framework for when emergency action plans need to be developed and updated. So any high or significant hazard dam is required to have an emergency action plan for it. That just speaks to the wet weather and dry weather failure of when that dam would fail under what types of conditions. And then it also includes the inundation area. So it shows exactly what parts of the community will be flooded and at different times or how long that's going to take to happen. So emergency action plans are required to be updated on an annual basis. And this one is also out of compliance. So again, the town of Auburn doesn't necessarily have any teeth to make this come to fruition, but we have a mitigation action in there specifically for the point of the emergency management director from Worcester reaching out and saying, where are we at with this? Because they are saying that they want to be a good faith partner. Coordinate with Auburn Water District to annually update emergency action plans for those 3 dams as well. So Darkbrook Reservoir Dam, Dike A and B, Lower Stoneville Pond Dam, and Upper Stoneville Reservoir Dam. So again, emergency action plans have to be updated annually, and so these are out of compliance and need an update. The update is actually fairly straightforward and simple. It's a checklist. You really just need to make sure that the people who are identified as being in the inundation zone, that list has been updated. So it's really something that's a really low lift. Action 30 is also from this 2024 HMP update as well. So conduct a full dam removal feasibility study for the Lower Stoneville Dam. So I just want to comment that none of these actions hold the town responsible for getting any of it done. You should look at it as sort of a giant wish list in case there's funding available. Because we're looking at, we carried these actions in from the MVP program and your summary of findings from that, from your master plan, from your open space and recreation plan. It opens up different funding mechanisms, and it shows a little bit more of a comprehensive analysis of the actions that the town is looking to pursue over the next 5 years. So again, it doesn't hold the town responsible to accomplish any of it. But again, if it's not identified in your plan and your plan is in compliance and in place, you won't be able to apply for funding to implement that. So we are in the public comment period right now. The public comment period ends on Friday. The plan is, we said it's on Facebook as well. The draft plan is available for public comment as well there. Adam has sent the draft plan around at the beginning of the public comment period to all municipal departments, boards and commissions. I sent the draft plan around to all the adjacent communities, which is a requirement of MEMA and FEMA, so that adjacent communities have the opportunity to weigh in on the plan. And after Friday is the deadline for public comments. I will take all the comments that have come in. I'll send those out to the local hazard mitigation committee, ask them which ones they want me to address. Sometimes we just disregard some comments because it's not necessarily applicable to a hazard mitigation plan update. Sometimes the general public doesn't fully understand what's behind a hazard mitigation plan. And then we hope to have a draft plan sent to MEMA by September 27th. We will develop, MEMA requires a plan review tool document to accompany that draft plan. And that essentially is just a separate document that sort of facilitates the review by MEMA and FEMA, letting them know where all of the required elements are located in the draft plan. We certainly have already gone and met the minimum requirements, but we've gone above and beyond as far as the content of the plan update as well. Project schedule, as far as we will have that sent by September 27th. MEMA has a 45 to 60 day queue to review that draft plan. 2 things will happen. They will either approve the plan and forward it on as is, forward it on to FEMA, or they will send a letter back saying that there are either required revisions or requested revisions. And again, I will make the required revisions. Any of the requested revisions, I will send back to the local hazard mitigation committee and ask them to weigh in on that. A lot of times it really comes down to just wordsmithing and semantics with comments from state and federal regulators. Once that plan goes to FEMA, FEMA then has a 45 to 60 day queue as well. MEMA has not been taking the full 45 to 60 day opportunity, which is great. FEMA pretty much uses the 2 months. But then once the plan comes back, approved pending adoption, Adam will get a letter from FEMA stating such. And then from that date forward, the town of Auburn has 1 year to formally adopt the plan as approved by FEMA by signing a resolution that the plan's in place. Once that happens, the plan is in compliance, and the town has 5 years from that point forward where your plan is compliant and is active and live, and you can apply for federal funding. That's pretty much the presentation. Any questions?
Greg, we're about 2 weeks into the comment period. Have you received any comments to date?
I received that one comment from the emergency management director in Worcester asking about the dam, I think it's Mill Pond Dam. And I just got an email today from the emergency management director in Oxford, just acknowledging receipt of the draft plan and the opportunity to provide comment.
So the resolution that you're referring to, once FEMA does its review,
Yeah.
that resolution takes place by a vote of the Board of Selectmen typically?
Yes, it's just a matter of approving it as presented. So I provided some draft language to Adam. Adam moved some stuff around so it's in the format of the town. So we need to send the draft resolution unsigned along with the draft plan to MEMA and FEMA. If we don't send, and that, it doesn't necessarily confirm, but it lets MEMA and FEMA know that the town is committed to the plan as presented and will adopt the plan once you get approved pending adoption notification from FEMA. So yeah, it's just a really brief presentation to the Board of Selectmen. Any other questions? Yes, Darlene.
Yes, so once we have the plan and the resolution and all that is in place, how would we become aware of the grant opportunities in order to kind of, that would fit into like our 30
Actions. Yes. So typically what will happen is FEMA will release a availability of funding opportunity, and that will trickle down to the state, and then MEMA will reach out to the towns and cities and towns, letting them know that there's I think it's Dave Woodbury would be the person from MEMA who would be doing that, letting folks know that there's a funding opportunity. In the last couple of years, MEMA has been going out of their way to make sure that they're providing technical assistance to communities as well in developing that application. The one thing that is challenging is that a FEMA application for federal funding to implement a hazard mitigation action from your strategy requires a full-blown cost-benefit analysis, not the abbreviated cost-benefit analysis that we did as part of the HMP update. So the full-blown cost-benefit analysis requires the community to go through. It's actually it's an app that you can do online. But essentially what you have to do is you have to sort of build your case as to why you need to do this action, and you need to come up with a 1.0 or greater cost-benefit ratio. So that you're going to get that by if your impacts are significantly greater because of a particular reason, if your geographic area that includes that mitigation action is significant enough. And what typically happens is that towns will get a hazard mitigation plan in place and it's compliant, and then a funding opportunity is announced, and it's a quick turnaround time, and communities don't have the capacity internally to pull together that cost-benefit analysis. So my recommendation would be, if there are actions that have become high priority actions for the community, start working on those now. And I get that everybody's overwhelmed and understaffed and over capacity, but start building your case now. Start documenting if it's a flooding issue and there have been losses in the community, start documenting and collecting that and putting it in a separate file. Start taking photos of all the events that have happened and put that in the same file. So start to build your case so that when you do get that notice of funding opportunity, you're not starting from scratch and you've got 30 days to turn around an application.
And just a follow-up to that, is there... Just a follow-up to that, to the federal money?
Yes.
Is there state grant money?
So there's state...
Is any easier?
There's HMGP, no. There's the state funds that are easier, I think, from my experience, are the MVP funds. And there's also, right now, MVP through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs has a MVP 2.0 pilot project going on right now, where they are, so MVP 1.0 is what the town became a certified MVP community under, and now you're eligible to apply for action grants. The MVP process 1.0 was stakeholder invite only. It wasn't a general public sort of welcome situation. And the state has now determined that they have maybe inadvertently omitted vulnerable populations and folks who are typically disadvantaged or left out of planning initiatives. So now the MVP 2.0 pilot project year, which is, we're currently in the middle of it, has more of a focus on taking your MVP goals from 2019 in your case, reworking them after you've done significant outreach with vulnerable populations and environmental justice communities, so that you have more of a social aspect associated with that and not just your typical hazard mitigation. So things that would benefit typically underrepresented or typically disadvantaged folks, so low mod income, environmental justice areas. So when you do apply for an MVP 2.0 project, you actually get the funding to implement the pilot project, but then it comes with a $50,000 reserve. Once you've gone through your MVP 2.0 process first, and the result of that would be to identify a project that the town wants to implement. That $50,000, once you get to that point, that $50,000 is then unlocked, and the town can actually implement that project. So I would say MVP is your best bet for state, and HMP is definitely federal. At the same time, the other reason to bring mitigation actions from other plans is your open space and recreation plan, accessing CPA funds, accessing all other different types of mechanisms that other plan studies and reports are tapping into, and bringing your hazard mitigation work into that as well. And I also will say that MEMA and FEMA they're sort of big on regional collaboration and partnering. If there's a community that you've worked with in the past and it's been a successful project, or you think you might want to work with, then it's another way to expand that cost-benefit analysis, that geographic context, and get your 1.0 cost-benefit analysis ratio above 1.0. And typically, if you don't get above 1.0, it's not necessarily, it doesn't mean that it's a deal breaker, but it's probably not likely that it will get funded immediately. But it also serves as an indicator to the community that you can go back, you can rework your loss numbers, you can rework your geographic context and maybe include other areas in the community so that you can achieve that 1.0. And then also sometimes when the federal funding is released and not fully accessed, which actually does happen all the time, there will be another ask and another notice of availability of funds that MEMA will put out to cities and towns for another round of funding. So you can still do the same application if you didn't achieve that 1.0 cost benefit ratio. You can start building that case again to make sure that you get over that threshold. Yes. I'm not sure if they have.
We received 2 action grants in the past, one looking at water quality across the town and one looking at some preliminary engineering of a failing culvert.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you for your time tonight. Again, the draft plan is available on the town's website. The public comment period ends on Friday. My contact information is available there, so you can submit your comments directly to me. And again, Once we close the comment period, I will provide all the comments that came in to the local hazard mitigation committee, and we will modify or revise the plan before we submit it to MEMA, hopefully on the 27th of the month. Thank you for your time.